I'm John Batchelor. Mary Kissel, the editorial board of the Wall Street Journal and the host of Opinion Journal, is here. Mary and I are New Yorkers, and we are 17 floors above Pennsylvania Station. There are a great number of commuters come in and out of this part of Manhattan every day. It's a global center for communication, transportation, and indigence. I'm talking about not necessarily homeless, but people who wander the street who look to be extremely reduced, either by health or by chemical addiction or by despair. And some of them carry large sacks of bottles on their shoulders as if they're going to cash them in. Others look incoherent during the day. Now, this is a phenomenon of New York. You get used to it. It's hard. Some people out front of Pennsylvania Station sit in wheelchairs without legs and beg for money. It's very challenging. It's part of life in New York. The question, Mary, to you, before we go to this, have you noticed any change? You've been here several years under Mr. Bloomberg, under Mr. Kelly. Have you noticed any change these last months, especially since the mayoral election and Mr. de Blasio mentioning that he wants to change the atmosphere in the streets of New York?
Yeah, I have, John. I ride the subways every day here. I ride for a long time, about 30 minutes both ways. Not long for many commuters, but long for me. And I've noticed a lot of homeless and, as you say, indigents wandering around the platforms and on the trains as well. In fact, I went downstairs just the other day and wasn't looking. It was the early morning. I was exhausted. I was gearing up for work in my mind and thinking about work. And I almost ran into this very aggressively, almost violent homeless man who was on the platform with a cart of clothing and his other worldly possessions. And as I lifted my head up, I realized that everyone else on the platform was slowly backing away. Right. So I followed them backing away.
And
very
sometimes
scary.
when you get an empty car, it's because there are occupants who are
wrong.
Very unsavory or threatening, and you just leave. Ed Hayes joins. Ed is a friend of the NYPD, and he knows several police commissioners, including Mr. Bratton, who was here in New York and in Los Angeles and in Boston, and has been mentioned by the newly mayor-elect de Blasio as a possible replacement, or the successor to, not replacement, successor to Mr. Kelly, who served for 12 years for the Bloomberg administration very successfully. Ed, you ride Metro in New York, and you watch the streets, and you travel around Manhattan as we do. Have you noticed a change, Ed, or am I projecting here?
No, I have noticed a change, and I think, for instance, when I took the bus home tonight, there was an aggressive, unpleasant homeless woman sitting in one of the seats, taking up a couple of seats, and chewing like some kind of food and spitting out the pieces and looking like she was very challenging at the other riders. I think there has been an increase, and I think that the big issue will be who he appoints as the police commissioner, because if he doesn't appoint an aggressive guy, a disciplined guy, then we're going to, in no time, you'll go back to the terrible conditions we had years ago, and that would be catastrophic for New York.
So, Eddie, beyond Bratton, there's another name that's been floated, the first deputy commissioner, Rafael Pinheiro. He's the highest-ranking Latino in the NYPD, and the New York Post has recently reported that he met with de Blasio to make his case for the job. What do we know about him?
He's a good fellow, actually. I know some. I've met him. I know some people that know him pretty well. The largest incoming group into the police department, into the police academy, are Hispanic. They're good, aggressive cops. They're not particularly... I mean, you can't go up to a Spanish guy and say, hey, brother. Spanish guys will say to you, listen, I know who my mother is. I ain't your brother, all right? And I think that if he is a disciplined, aggressive guy, he'd be fine. But I'm afraid he'll pick somebody who is his main mantra is community policing, which usually means don't bother anybody.
And that's what's going on right now. And it feels like the NYPD has backed off. Now, we've got a lot of people listening to us right now who are going to say, no, we haven't. But it just, I have the sense of things, Ed, and it wouldn't be far-fetched for them to back off, given all the noise for Mr. Kelly and stop and frisk.
Oh, I agree with you. I mean, I think we're going through a critical time in New York. I'll never forget when Bratton first came to New York. I had dinner with him very soon after he got here, with him and one of his chief advisors named John Maple.
This is early Giuliani.
Right.
Yes.
And I said to Commissioner Bratton, I said, look, we have a terrible crime problem. A good example is the squeegee guys. I said, do you think I should sell my house? and he looked at me and he said, "We're not going to have a crime problem much longer. The squeegee guys are going tomorrow, and tomorrow the squeegee guys were thrown out of there." Right? Now that's the kind of attitude towards policing that you need. And I tell you, the people wandering the streets, homeless, threatening, is just a terrible, terrible thing in New York. It's frightening, creates a terrible image, and that's one of the things you have to deal with right away.
But Eddie, it's not just frightening for the riders. I also feel for these homeless people and these indigents, and many of whom have mental health disorders, and they're just wandering the streets without shelter, without food.
There's two sides to it. Well, it's not
we've got 30 seconds. Go ahead, Ed.
They need to be cared for, and a lot of them need to be medicated, and they stop taking their medication, and they're dangerous. Look, whatever it is, it's the safest big city in New York, in the country. There's been tremendous progress made in terms of reducing crime, a lot of which, of course, comes from the success of raising the status of minorities around the country and affirmative action and so forth. But I think it's a big risk.
Ed Hayes.
I don't trust that. This is, of all the things with de Blasio, this is the one I least trust him.
He's got an opportunity to do the right thing. Ed Hayes, my consigliere. Thank you, Ed. Mary Kissel, I'm John Batchelor.